Chapter 10. The Nomads. No one is born hating another person because of the colour of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Nelson Mandela, on the Long Walk to Freedom. Belief and choosing to live your life based on a creed, code of honour, or religious text may very well be beneficial to yourself and the others around you. However, what is often hard to accept is that those very morals and teachings may not be compatible immediately with others. In addition, the possibility of a plausible period involving negotiations, civil discussion, and an appeal to a common decency may lead to something mutually beneficial to both parties. However, the harsh reality is that vast majorities of these teachings follow a similarity that is as virulent and destructive as the very demons they wish to eradicate, labelling those different or minorly disagreeable to them as something to be shunned and eradicated. This is typically born out of hatred that is taught, along with the animosity of the other and the built-in fear of the unknown to all life that can revert even the most sophisticated and civilized down to the primal, animalistic destructiveness that we're all capable of. If you and me were pushed hard enough, we would be aimed to tear each other's tongue out if it meant we wouldn't have to deal with each other's opinions we find most disgusting. It should go without saying that there is a universal kindness built into everyone that is just as much as there as a universal tendency to violence. We have, after all, thousands of years' worth of philosophers and their teachings that provide their own sayings and advice on living to combat this and keep out the dark sides locked away at all cost. Why does a man seek to protect his woman, his children, his troop? And why does a woman seek to nurture the children and care for the family and provide a moral standpoint and a reason to fight for? Duty. Nature, and above all else the undeniable urge to become greater than where we stand now. So, what happens when all that collapses? Or isn't present? Monsters. Monsters are made. Monsters that pose as the new virtues and friends so desperately craved by the forgotten, the outcast, and those who demons have weakened their defences to manipulation. Wherever they go, their influence and destructive tendencies follow in their wake like a storm surge, and only the most formidable structures can withstand it. Tiberius had these moral standpoints and people to fight for. Biases and all, he had been taught, like you and me, to support each other and be open to change. But with diligence, be wary of those that seek to exploit your kindness and morals against. He knew it deep down in his core that he was broken himself. Losing those teachings and the reasons to press on, as a result of losing the war, his people fought tooth and nail to survive, in spite of it all, had fractured his. Feeling the clutch of hatred pierce his mind like the talons of a hawk, his spite had been staved off by the generosity of the Obero peoples, and to their credit, they understood to leave him to his own space. The apparitions of the people he well and truly held in his heart he let down stalked him, a vast crowd of ghostly figures that judged him with their stares alone. His own self-loathing could only believe that they were looking at him with disgust. That he should have tried harder, he wasn't the best he could be, and that he didn't deserve to have survived. These words struck him as arrows would strike bare flesh, though he wouldn't pull them out. He had lost the will to let them dig any deeper, and as much he would wish to pull. He simply didn't care. The events of the past week had him pulled back into an abyss he was so blissfully unaware was still inside. He merely got used to its embrace. If it wasn't these shades rallying around and affirming his own guilt in his conscious state, then the living memories he could experience filled the gaps of time spent sleeping. Though he was too powerful to rid himself of these burdens, the last sliver of responsibility tarnished by a need for bloodshed and revenge as it may be, but it was enough to propel him forward. He had himself, his fist, his power, though he thought of the other possessions he had little of. That was hidden away in both the keepsake of his mind and the physical tomb they were stored in, the second half of the wrecked ship. Though he would not venture there, the pressure of his own demons was caving on him to the brink of breaking him, and that pilgrimage to the vault of his past would surely drag him under. No, his mind was set elsewhere. Perhaps it might just be as far from that pit as possible for him on this world. On the contrary, he was clueless to where or what his final destination would be. He never thought of nothing outside of going in a general direction. He was lost mentally and physically, and should the Orions return abruptly, as it stood right now, tactically, in the open desert, the other natives to the planet, the Mukalla. Not long had passed since he left behind the cold bite of the snowy mountain tops. Perhaps 2 days ago, if counting the times, the red dwarf had arisen over the horizon after he moved onto the coarse and blistering sands below. The wind ruffled his hair, jacket and trousers that had been stitched anew thanks to the Oberon's fine craftsmanship towards textiles. The wind blew out an envelope from the top pocket that Tiberius caught in a flash and without looking, unfurling the already unsealed paper to read the note that was left by Phaon. "Thank you, lad. As much as you may blame yourself over time, you'll always have sanctuary on our lands and a friend waiting to greet you there." A friend? Something Tiberius had an overabundance of once, yet quickly did the list decline. A shoulder to lean on, and vice versa, for the many horrors that had transpired his time as king. It touched his heart to know that despite it all, there was at least one being in this vast, unforgiving universe that would spare the time to listen to him, to help him, and perhaps believe in him more than he would himself. It is that spark of camaraderie that spurred him on after the fight with the Gerahene lords. Tiberius was quick once to resign his fate atop the wreckage he had slept, knowing he had been weakened significantly from his battles, that mayhap once slip off the edge may be the conclusion to the torment he had been sentenced to. Though he didn't. Was it ego? Was it cowardice? Perhaps both. Perhaps after going through so much, to still be there in that moment would be an absolute waste to the memories of the people he carried on if he let himself at the mercy of a fall from a high place. On the contrary, in his heart and mind, he knew why, though it clogged up his throat like a stone, based on shame to admit it. But he had grown a new sense of responsibility to try and be there and strong for another race of peoples, who they themselves, in comparison to the uncaring universe, would not even amount to an amoeba. His nature, his upbringing, and the lessons he was given, with the power that he knew without the shadow of a doubt would compel him to act. Painful as it may seem, yet it's that decision that starts a long road to healing, success, and after all that, happiness. He walked through the desert. There was nothing else to do apart from looking at the vast scenery of sand. Sand and sand. And the occasional soaring birds high above and sparse plant life adapted to the harsh conditions. However, It was very, well, boring. Even the apparitions that stalked Tiberius took their leave and left him to his own thoughts. That for the first time in what could be too long his mind was blank and featureless as the sky and land around him. It was a pleasant numbness, the quiet and lack of anything, broken up by the rhythmic pace of his steps, his breath, and the calm whistle of the wind. Hours passed, and the mundane venture had a spark of interest. When approaching a large dune to take a scope of the landscape, Tiberius heard commotion. He could make out the tone of the voices that they were in a major inconvenience. The accents were far different than that of the Obero, so he could conclude that this was most likely the other inhabitants of the planet, the Mukalla. Reaching the peak of the sand dune, he observed two of the Mukalla at a broken-down cart. It had lost a wheel that snapped in two, leaving the rest of the cart to be dug into the sand. Not even the six-legged, humped creature that was attached to it could muster enough strength to budge it, and so resigned itself to sit calmly, in contrast to the frustration of the travellers. Tiberius knew what he had to do. It was a no-brainer, and with a smile, he slid down the dunes to meet with the Mukalla, who upon seeing his frame descending jolted and hid behind the cart. He made out that they appeared to have a slimy skin, patterned light brown, with green spots and bulging eyes akin to an amphibian. Covered in head to toe in a white robe to shield from the rays of the star, and just under half the height of him. Tiberius could hail them, muttering to each other from around the other side, and gently approached to see them from around the corner of the cart. Finally, eye contact was made, and first contact with a wave from both parties, awkward as it may have been, and both sharing an innocent curiosity and awe at the vastly different appearances of each. "Greetings there, fellow wanderer," spoke the native in an adenodial, nasally voice that had a droning undertone of a trombone. "And greetings to you, too. You seem to be having some issues." Tiberius passed the cart and walked around it to observe the contents. It had contained food, water, and some rugs, deducing that it was a supply caravan. "Yes, we are late to arrive at our camp with the supplies. We should have been there in an hour, but now I don't know if it'll ever reach. That was our spare tire, too," spoke the man. "Well, I am Tiberius, and I'll help you move it. Does that sound good?" "Well, that is a good gesture there, Tiberius. Name's Rabbit, and this here's my brother Rabbit. But I don't see how you'll be able to carry all these goods, even with those logs you have for arms." Tiberius smiled from the remark, and the curiosity of the natives. "Well, I can do this." He positioned himself underneath the cart in a squatting position, and began to lift it cleanly on his shoulders. The sight of such strength recoiled Robert and Rabbit back to their steed and mounted the saddle. Tiberius reassured them with a smile. "So then, we're two friends." Both of the brothers' mouths were open in sheer amazement. Rabbit shouted, "You sure you ain't going faint on us?" "Ha! I have my own shade, don't I?" joyfully remarking, beginning to steadily walk with the cart on his shoulders to ensure nothing would drop off. The brothers would be able to pick up or place it back on either way, but it's some reinforcement to his intentions. The steed took the lead under the command of Robert, who waved Tiberius to follow. He shouted over to him, "At this pace we'll make it halfway through the night. We'll miss the feast, though." Feast? Food? Water? Shelter? Now that piqued Tiberius' interest for sure, enough to motivate him into a power walk, and then when gaining enough steadiness, began a staple jog. Once again his experience of lifting tanks and running with them had come in handy, overtaking the steed and forcing it to pace with him. However, he realised that the steed may tire, so Tiberius slowed down to allow the steed to be in a steady pace with him, and asked to the riders, "Will it make it like this?" "It drank water shortly before you arrived. She'll be fine throughout, and at this rate we'll be there at sunset." Good news for Tiberius. He could keep the pace until then, treading on gleefully through the desert to the destination led by the brothers. Tiberius shouted through the rustling of the sand and the howl of the air, "You guys were pretty trustworthy of a stranger. What gives?" Rabbit answered, "To be honest, Tibby, if I can call you that, you scared the lights out of us." Robert interjected, "So we just played along and hoped you'd leave us be or steal a few of our goods at best. We wasn't really in a position to be scrapping with you." It gave Tiberius a warm sense to the heart he hadn't felt in a long time. Even the Obero were reluctant at first when they saw him and kept their distance. These amphibious, almost frog-like humanoids dropped their insecurities when he offered to help them. I appreciate the honesty. All this food, how long will it last your camp?" 2 weeks, Tibby. Even with the feast we'll be having tonight, we got plenty to go around." Sounds promising. Let's get there in due time, then. Sunset had arrived. Tiberius did not lose any pace whatsoever, and to the relief of the Nomads, the outline of their camp could be seen. Using his sight to zoom in, Tiberius could make out around 25 tents organised in the shape of a horseshoe, one dominating them by 4 times in size at the camp's centre. He could see the silhouettes of the people gathering at the open space between the tents. Rabot and Robert overtook him with the steed to lead him in, clearing the way of the curious and excited children amazed at the sight of a giant moving something much larger than them. Having such a reception was nostalgic. He could see as he passed by the peoples carrying atop his shoulders their needs for the next fortnight that there was a warmth of adulation and relief. Perhaps it was good that these strangers didn't know him fully. He believed if he was to ever disclose much of his past, they'd think of him in a different light. For now at least, he could be glad to help, still after all these years wallowing in the prison of his mind. The brothers had signalled him to place the cart to a tent marked with a symbol outside its entrance. Though seeing the utensils catered towards cooking, it was obvious. When he lowered it gently, as not to damage the goods, at the last second, he was awarded with a cheer and an applause from the townspeople who had encircled him during. Tiberius, despite having crowds of thousands cheering for him, after a heartfelt speech and promises fulfilled, found this just to be as equally exhilarating. To him, it was the very small scale in comparison. Often it's overlooked on how even the smallest things can have such big effects on people, or a community at large. A simple gesture of strength to carry a cart was trivial to him, but to this camp it meant 2 weeks of not having to worry about food, water and amenities. The nostalgia of helping Aboriginal tribesmen of both his ancestry and brotherhood brought with it a fond smile, something Tiberius became almost alien to. However, he was after all a stranger in a strange land, and he was hoping to find Rabat and Robert next to him to point him in the right direction to either get some quiet or a drink. Though they had retired themselves inside the dining tent, seen through the waving rug of a doorway at its front to fill up themselves. Apparently hunger was more of a motivator. Understandable. A voice called out from the crowd, and it carried a calming, fruity voice, but with a robust deliverance that it had overridden the commotion and shunted it all to a halt. "Great tidings to you! To whom do I owe my thanks to?" The crowd had parted a path in the middle of what was revealed a man sporting the same amphibious features of the Mukalla. However, He had purple patches and golden spots, and wore a red-bladed robe. He was a charming fellow, with his wide mouth creating a most jolly smile that had his cheeks arch at the end. He bore a physique that was as large as his smile, not as skinny, but a little chunky on the sides in the manner of his body, as if it was struggling to contain his charming demeanour. He trotted along gleefully to Tiberius, planting himself firmly on the ground in front of him. "I am Tiberius, Your Excellency. Am I safe to assume you're the camp's patriarch?" The fellow giggled in a delightful tone. "Why, yes, young man, I am, and dare I say, built like the finest boulder you are, and yet you handled our supply cart as if it was a newborn. Such delicacy!" Bowing his head before jolting back straight. My apologies. My name is Bloomberg, Mr. Tiberius. I thank you deeply for bringing us the supplies. We had our worries as the sun started to set, and that a great trouble must have struck my nephews." Tiberius raised a hand. "You're welcome, sir. It wasn't much for me to handle, but it gladdens me to see so many people will be content for the next 2 weeks." The patriarch had straightened his robe's collar and slipped back a feather from his head. "You are indeed nothing of the sort seen before, and I would not know which to reward you in a way you may appreciate it, or of value to you in exchange for your service. So, I may ask out of courtesy to offer you a place to stay for a while, for only a traveller would be in these here parts of the desert, and even you must be weary." He waved his hands to gesture to Tiberius to follow him. He followed in the stride of the patriarch as he led him to the main tent. Like a stretched-out dome to an ellipse, it had multiple holes where smoke rose. The leathery outlines of the structure were adorned with many paintings done by both hand and brush. What even being done right at this moment? As well as being followed by the townspeople who were as curious as you could ever define it, some also offered trinkets and gifts that Tiberius respectfully declined, for he wished to only take what he needed from them within reason. The night sky was bristling with as much stars as there were torches lining the pathways paved by generations of treading and the sand down to a firm and unshakable stability. There was music from handheld drums and rattles made from bones and wood next to a large campfire at the centre of the village as a sort of gathering hub, though Tiberius was diverted to enter the main tent with the patriarch. Upon entering, the cold and dry air of the desert evening was replaced with the aromas of herbs and flowers. The tent was taken up by 2/3 of a flattened area of rock, covered by an assortment of rugs, pillows and pelts, all neatly organised in a circle around a small fire that had a pot of soup simmering away. As for the rest of the tent, on each side of the flattened central area was a flank of raised beds and ornaments of significance, glass jars and ceramic pottery crafted by a perfect blend of basic, unmodern yet sophisticated design, from the workmanship of those that did it for living and purpose, not fame or money. The patriarch had settled himself at the foot of the pyre, in the middle on half a dozen of cushions against a backrest. He gestured for Tiberius to sit to the side of the pyre near as well, where some of the natives arranged some cushions and pelts for him to sit on. With a sigh of relief and relaxation, Tiberius surrendered himself to the soft mercy of the cushions, and dropped down on them with a thud. Actual comfort for however long it was since, and the patriarch couldn't help but exchange a glance and a chuckle from his assistants. "You have no idea how much this feels soft to me." The patriarch had clapped his hands with a childish laughter. "They're yours if you wish, Tiberius. We are delighted in our crafts. Now, my friend, where was your intent on going until you came across my nephews?" At this point, Tiberius had laid on his back and looking up to the dyed ceiling. For a few seconds, he couldn't really find an answer. "I don't know, really. I was merely aiming to leave behind the Oberro, as I wrote someone wanted attention to them. It was bad timing. Their queen came at that time too. Bloomberg ate a grape by snatching it with his tongue. Ah, Maeve! She is a fair lady, when she's not brash. I had met her before, when there was a gathering of leaders, decades ago, when we all took our leaves across this world. Tiberius rolled to his side to face the patriarch. Our leaves? He inquired. The patriarch had drank some water, and offered some to Tiberius, who accepted. There was... how do I put this? A falling out, decades ago, about how we would live our lives. You see, on this world we were fully together. Technology was brought in from some visitors who have since never returned, and it challenged a lot of our traditions on both culture and living. Some embraced the technology fully, while some like me and Phaon were at an impasse. So we all gathered and settled our differences verbally, and said our farewells where needed, and still we kept some ties. That explained a question Tiberius had ready next. It was why there was a race of, as he described in the most basic terms, frog people in a desert. A diaspora of sorts, though the mention of Phaon piqued his interest. Phaon? You know him well? Ah, yes. He was a good man. Knew his way around food for sure, as you could see from this belly. Aye, and he most definitely hasn't lost himself. They both smirked. Bloomberg was indeed correct. In addition to the chap, he kept in touch with us. He even referenced you, but not by name. Simply said a big man crashed near his parts. I'd be more on guard if I hadn't had the letter from him. The letter? Ah, Tiberius remembered now. He took the letter he had from his pocket and gave it for Bloomberg to read, who read it out loud. With a cheery smile, gave it back to Tiberius for his keeping. A friend of Phaon is a friend of mine. I offer you a place at our camp, our hospitality, and, if need be, guidance for however long of a stay you seem fit. To say Tiberius had whiplash was an understatement. It was that long ago he was advised to leave the company of the Oberro. Though that had its justification, it was also noted how he was still seen as an outsider and left alone for most parts, only being asked to do some heavy lifting here and there. Though not only offered, but rewarded for a simple gesture of goodwill and welcomed by the elder into his community without hesitation, after a small introduction, began to fill the cracks in his heart, keeping the warmth of companionship inside and not escaping to allow the cold embrace of sorrow to take its place. Bloomberg led him out of the tent. The campfire in the middle had grown by about a third, and gathered around it was presumably all the nomads. There was 50 at first glance of all ages, colours and attire. No more could be seen coming from tents further down the arc of the camp structure, making their way to join the festivities. It was a feast indeed. Food that had been prepared, some of which contained the very goods that Tiberius had carried across the sands. Incense filled the lungs of all with a calming embrace. Some had even danced around the fire in a circle holding hands, while those near applauded in a rhythm. It had only occurred to him now. His brain had recently unfolded an old memory for him to draw a comparison between the elder Bloomberg and a friend he once had. And it pleased him to know deep down that another being could replicate the mannerisms of Tiberius's childhood friend, Remus, who had known him before he had become king, before even the military, and during nursery, when they were just boys play fighting with the cool sticks that they found under a tree. Although Remus was a lean, athletic man with a pro-simian features and a prehensile tail, in contrast to the amphibious looks of Bloomberg and the obvious difference of accents, he could almost hear Remus's voice come from the lips of the elder. He sat himself at a distance from the fire further back than the crowd, secluded by the shadow of a nearby tent with a small lamp, and the light of his own azure eyes would display him being there. It also came as quick as the memory to also seclude himself. His doubts hadn't left him, but merely took refuge in the corners of his mind, and like a predator, they waited for the right moment to strike back out. And that was the moment. Bloomberg read the man like a book, tipping to his nephews Robert and Rabot to take the limelight of the celebrations away from him and Tiberius, which the two men sprung to immediately. Whilst the crowd was at a trance with the nephews of the elder, positioned himself on a rock near Tiberius. In my years of being this community's guiding hand, I know the clutch of anxiety on a man when I see it. What troubles you, friend? He made sure to relax himself to be as welcoming and open-minded as he can through both body language and tone of voice, and gave Tiberius all the time he needed to come up with an answer. Tiberius fidgeted with his feet, and twiddled his thumbs before answering, staring right into the fire, as engaging in eye contact may as well as being as heavy as 1,000 tanks. It's all just happening so fast, and well, seeing it all just being here and his brain was in a rush. His breathing laboured, and even his eyes withdrew from the fire and struggled to find another focal point. You have burdens on your mind, weighed down by them, and so you feel you're incapable of moving from them. Tiberius was still silent, merely nodding, so the elder continued. But you can change. As you are in this moment, you're vastly different from the man who helped my nephews, who shared a laugh with me earlier, and brought relief to my people. That was a good change, and a good start to wherever is troubling you. Please, if it'll help you, tell me your troubles. He protested. I've been a burden enough to even fail. He was met with a retort of confidence. I've had my fair shares of burdens, boy. I am who and where I am today by listening to, or as you put it, bearing a burden. And with that physique and attire of yours, along with your judgment to help, and not accept it yourself, has me thinking, you have been in a similar position to me. And then, something bad happened that was out of your control. He shook his head vigorously. No, it was. And yet, I stumbled, I tried my fucking hardest, and it just wasn't enough. And so much people, so much shit, so much just fucking gone! In frustration, Tiberius hurled a pot to the air. Everyone paused to see it go so fast that it left a trail of dust, and left even the vision of the most precise onlookers. The crowd turned to see him, though Bloomberg was quick to deflect them away with a flick of his hands to resume what they were doing. The people knew what Bloomberg was doing, and so they obliged immediately. Turning back to look at Tiberius, Bloomberg gave the time he needed to calm back down and offered. I offer you a chance to unburden your mind. My prejudices, if I have any, are cast aside and replaced with patience to listen. I will hold no ill will to whatever deeds you have done, only guidance. However you wish to disclose them to me, I am merely your outlet to vent. However, I would advise against a physical vent. Instead of words, Tiberius held out his hand and spoke directly to Bloomberg with the sincerity of a sovereign. Grasp my hand, but no doing so will subject you to not just my memories, but the emotions, the sounds, and the pain I've experienced fighting a war that, while I wish could be won, I was naive to defy failure until it consumed all I had. Without hesitation, not even an instant to consider, to even the shock of Tiberius, Bloomberg grasped his hand tightly with both his webbed hands. And as forewarned, he was struck with the thousands of memories of thousands of atrocities, heartaches, and pain, of 1,000 bullets, missiles, spells, shells, knives, swords, maces, fists, and the power of omegas, just like him, unleashed onto the young, the old, the smart, the impudent, the loyal, the treacherous, and the innocent, and the guilty. A slaughter from a war of biblical proportions. He could feel every stab, every shot, every blast Tiberius had been dealt, while never ignoring the anguish he was protecting and the death rouse of those he couldn't save. A full, unfiltered, unrelenting presentation of a genocide of so much good on so many worlds, their history, their peoples, their culture, everything that could be considered a footprint to the galaxy at large as an acknowledgement to their existence, burned, blown, and slashed away at the mercy of the heartless wrath, zealotry, and violence of the Orion Empire. Though he did not falter on his grasp, no, Bloomberg shouldered it. He was determined beyond reason at this sight. He challenged it. He wrestled it. He was not accepting that these were the only things Tiberius could define himself by. Until he finally saw through the shadows like a beaming pillar of light. He pierced the anguish and saw the sum of what Tiberius bore so much over losing. It was family, friends, and a kingdom of tens of billions. He could see them all, their faces, their clothes, even hearing some of their voices. Though he may not understand their meaning, he knew that it meant a lot to Tiberius. And even more so when spending a time as a husband, a father, and a spiritual lead to an ever-growing, determined, and prosperous society. His will was still astonishing. Tiberius couldn't fathom someone half his size, past his prime, and content with so little, and yet still willing to share what he had. That he could withstand such a bombardment of the mind, though Bloomberg dug deeper into the subconscious to pinpoint the root or the climax of the pain of the failure. And there he saw it. He could only see its silhouette, but its presence dwarfed the previous experience to such a lower degree that even a speck of dust would be greater in comparison to this titanic monstrosity. It bared 4 arms outstretched in a challenge to all, adorned with a horn crest with the physique of a god. It was the architect, the commander, the spiritual zeal of those that wronged Tiberius. It was the emperor of the Orion Empire. It was Melitian. Despite the efforts of Bloomberg to see more, this presence was beyond anything he could fathom in his life. It was unrelenting, tenfold even, and he physically was shot off his feet, and his grasp slipped, falling flat off his back. I'm sorry. Please excuse me. Tiberius shot off his feet and went into a secluded tent where there was a place to rest. Bloomberg still was recovering from the assault to his mind from the mere essence of Emperor Melitian. He protested anyone to visit Tiberius. Let him be. Although you may not see it, he's been through more than even our history could amount to. I would talk to him in the morning, should he allow it. Above all else, let him rest. And so, the festivities had carried on, though even Bloomberg now had a shadow cast of the Emperor in his mind, the existence of which had seemingly left a chill down his spine, and how much Tiberius was lost and needed answers. He desired some answers himself. And with that, we will continue the story in Chapter 11. Thank you for listening.